Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we're back in War Thunder and it's time to talk about matchmaking, and the reason for this is because no matter what happens to the matchmaking, even if you create the perfect computer system in order to matchmake all of the War Thunder players, if you were able to do them by rank and then work out an equal amount of rank on each side, an equal amount of BR vehicles in each side, the match itself would still not be fair. And this is just something that we're going to have to get to grips with. And the reason for that is because of human behavior in the form of its players. Now, there have been many games over the years which have struggled with this idea, because there is nothing accounting for human emotions in matchmaking. It's very hard for computers to read human emotions and even put them into practice. If you actually look at a game like League of Legends or Dota, this is amplified to the max because everybody wants to win. Overall, the general rule in video games is people want to win, funny enough. And in League and Dota, there is always 10 or 20 champions in the MOBA setting which are seen as better than the others in the desired roles that they are played. Even if we shallow it down to a role, generally there is 2 or 3 picks out of over 100 champions in each of the games, which can be seen to be meta. And because of this, you will get the same matchup over and over and over again. And it is incredibly boring after maybe 20 to 50 games. And the reason for this is because people want to win. They want to progress through the ranks. They want to be able to push forward and show their worth in a video game. And this is something which is good, because it means that you know the people on your team are going to try and push as hard as they can to win the battle. And yes, some of them will get frustrated and tilt, or maybe they're just not as good as they think they are, or maybe they become overconfident. But these are definitely side effects of the fact that they want to win, which the majority of players want to do. Now, we see how this happens in League and Dota, and many other games, which eventually will have stale metas. Hearthstone is another wonderful example. So, if you know anything about Hearthstone, it is a card game which is made by Blizzard, basically based around World of Warcraft, but has expanded into different games while it's been going on. And basically, it is a CCG. So it's a collectible card game, but it is an online one. What you see after every expansion happens is you have maybe a day of people experimenting with different decks and all of this stuff, and then what happens is after that day, people start Netdecking. Now what Netdecking is people looking on the internet for decks to use with the new cards, and generally the ones which are voted the most are the best, and therefore everybody starts playing them, so therefore you only have 1 or 2 in the meta. Now what actually happened the last big expansion of Hearthstone is there was obvious issues with certain decks being very much overpowered. There was Jade Druid, Pirate Warrior, and there was another one which I can't remember right now. But basically, it created this scenario where Jade Druid, which is one class with one archetype, was over 50% of the games which were happening on their ladder, so their rank system. This just showed how broken the deck itself was. One archetype of one class out of 9, I believe there is. There may be 8, but I believe it's 9. Once again, maybe 8, or maybe even 6, who knows. I'm not going to count them right now. Actually, I think it's 6. But anyway, one archetype of one class, and that was dominating the whole of ranked, the majority of this. And this is because of the human want to win. Nobody wants to play the second best. Nobody wants to play the third best. What people want to do is play the best. This is why in War Thunder, if you take this idea and put it into it, you will see certain BRs, and what will happen is that people will conglomerate around them because they see these really good tanks and they look up the stats on either Thunderskill or talk to other people, ask them what the best tanks are, and then over time they just work out what the best tanks are, and they generally play around them. Now, luckily in War Thunder, we have a few mechanisms which at least dampen the effect of some skill-based matchmaking, and that is basically the research system. You see this in World of Tanks as well. What we have in War Thunder means that you have to play a specific nation if you want to research its specific vehicles. Now, if we didn't have this in place, I bet you any money that at every BR, people would try and play exactly the same machine which was deemed the best machine. So at 6.7 you would either see a T-29, a Tiger II SLAR, an RU-251, or you would see maybe a British Carnarvon, whatever was deemed best. If we were looking at this conglomeration of a massive ridiculous tree, all you would see was them versus them over and over and over again, because of people's incessant want of winning and pushing forward with the research. But as I said, the mechanism of the nations dampens its effect in War Thunder, meaning that we are much more constrained by the BRs that we play, instead of the nations themselves. So you know for a fact that if you come up against a different nation, you are going to have some variety, which is very nice. I mean, the fact is, even if you face Germany over and over and over again, at least you're not facing the same vehicle that you are using. Now, where does this become an issue in War Thunder? Because obviously if people are grinding out different nations, then that means that there is at least some variety involved compared to other games such as Hearthstone and such as League of Legends and Dota. Where is the issue? Well, the issue is popularization around certain BRs. We know for a fact that 6.7 is a very hot BR for America, for Britain, for Germany, and I suppose you could throw in Japan in there if you wanted. But basically, Russia has always got the end of the stick at 6.7. It has a few premiums that are there, and it has the SU-100P. Now, what happened was we had the IS-6 brought in at 7.0, now it's at 7.3, and this screwed with the matchmaker, because this basically meant all of those 6-7 teams, these 6-7 Americans versus 6-7 Germans, were now getting up to 7.0 against the IS-6s because the IS-6 became popular. Now that the IS-6 is at 7.3, now those teams get up tiered to 7.3 instead, facing even more vehicles, which are a higher tier than them. So what we see is the fact that with people's incessant want to win, they're going to gravitate to the most popular vehicles, and therefore a lot of vehicles are going to be left in the dust, and therefore the people trying to play those vehicles will actually move on to the vehicles which everybody else is using. This means that the meta becomes stale, this means that the matchmaker becomes stale, and this pisses people off. And then they start complaining about things that can be changed in the matchmaker, but the issue is it will never fix the core problem, that is the human want to win. And no game has ever been able to solve this riddle, because it is impossible to solve. If you give people the opportunity to choose 10 things, and 2 of them are good out of the 10, and let's say they're equally good to each other, then you will have a system where maybe 50% of the people pick one of them, and 50% of people pick the other one. But the other 8 will never ever get touched. And over the last few weeks, I've been playing and spading the T44, and also I've been playing the M26, because in the tournaments, those are the 2 premier vehicles in my opinion, and those are the ones that I'm mainly going to be using. So therefore spading the T44 was incredibly important in order for it to be useful for tournament play. And while I was playing both of these vehicles, I realized the massive issue that War Thunder has. And it's not the BR system. It's not the matchmaking system as a whole. It is the fact that people gravitate to the best vehicles, which leaves everything else in the dust. The T44 sits at 6.3, which is a BR which you would think would get down-tiered quite a lot. 5.3 is the Hellcat, 5.7 is the Tiger, but what the majority of times happen is you actually get up-tiered into 7.3 or 6.7, because that is where the majority of the other players from the other nations are fighting. And the people who fight the Tigers and fight the Hellcats are each other. So the Hellcats fight the Tigers, the T44s get up-tiered, and then you're left in a situation where the T44 can't deal with the Tiger 2H from the front. Because of the buff to the Tiger 2H's armor, especially on its turret cheeks, you have to use the latest, the furthest round, the rank 4 APCR round from the T44 in order to pen its turret, and that is the flat part of the turret. So what happens is you're left in a situation where you cannot reliably pen the Tiger 2 from the front with the T44. But you can't put the T44 down in matchmaking, you cannot put it at 5.7 or 6.0, because then it would constantly club the Tigers and the Hellcats that it would see. The T44 still has a good turret as long as it's not facing the long 88 or the massive guns that the Americans can bring out, and the Sabo shots. But against something like a shorter 88, such as the Tiger or the 76 on the Sherman or the Hellcat, it will dominate. So it's left in this weird area and is much more down to the mercy of the players playing around it instead of the matchmaking system itself. The M26 is another vehicle which is very much like this. So the M26 in itself is a 90mm quite slow medium tank with decent armor, but it's 6.3 because it gets up-tiered constantly into 6.7 and even 7.3 with all of the IS-6s running around, or 7.0 with the decent German lineup that they have with the Panther II, the Tiger 105 and the Kugelblitz. What happens is you constantly get up-tiered and you realize that you can't deal with Tiger 2Hs without once again using that APCR round, and because you don't have a long reload, you don't have a short reload, you don't have the armor that stops a long 88, you just sat there in the doldrums. And this was an issue when the M26 was first introduced. At least the T44 had its heyday back in the day when it was bouncing pretty much everything that the Germans could throw at it until its turret was fixed. The M26 from birth had issues because the Tiger 2H exists. And once again, this is because of the general player wanting to win. They want to play the best vehicles, they do play the best vehicles, which gives them the best chance of winning, and as long as it is of the nation that they're trying to research, they are still going to try and do that. And you could create any matchmaking system in the world, and this would happen. World of Tanks probably has the best matchmaking system if we're talking about fairness. It does not discriminate by nation, it does not discriminate by tier. It actually has, you can have, it's equal numbers of people from each tier on each team. So let's say you have 3 tier 8s on one team, you're going to have 3 tier 8s on the other. 4 tier 7s on one team, you're going to have 4 of them on the opposite team. It doesn't discriminate at all. But still, people gravitate to the best vehicles because they want to win. They want any edge that they can get. And this is one of the core edges that you can never take away from the player. You cannot force the player in order to use a machine that he does not want to use, unless you're doing some kind of event, and then the player once again has the choice whether they want to play it or not. So you're sat in this situation where you're going to have very unbalanced matchmaking because of the popularity of specific vehicles. If there's a lot of people playing the Tiger 2H, but not a lot of people playing the T34 or T29, but there is a lot of people playing the IS-6 and the object 906, then the Tiger 2Hs are going to get constantly up-tiered into IS6s. And that's just going to happen, because on each respective nation, people want to win. And there's nothing changing this. You will never be able to change this about human nature unless you take away the drive for ambition. And in gaming, that is never going to happen. It's something that has to be taken into account when talking about matchmaking, and it is something that seems to be forgotten constantly. People think that fixing matchmaking means making sure that everything has the right BR, making sure to even scrap the BR system to make sure that another system can come into play which is much more useful and will balance the whole game. That is impossible, because the only system that would be completely fair from a matchmaking point of view, and the only one that people would believe was fair, would be if each team only got one vehicle. And they got, let's say, a Tiger. So everybody on each of the sides gets a Tiger H1. And you know then what people would complain about? Maps. And then once you created a flat, symmetrical map with nothing different, then people would complain about the weather. So they would complain about the weather. Once the weather was fixed, so it was just clear skies constantly, then people would complain about the planes, so you make it so either no planes are in or only one plane can be in, and now you're left with an incredibly boring game. The same tank fighting the same tank on a flat plane with no aircraft to be seen. And that's what you would need to do in order to create a balanced matchmaker. And I'm very glad that isn't the case. I like the fact that a lot of battles are uneven. I like the fact that I have the ability to carry sometimes, and even if I carry sometimes, it doesn't always work out. Because I know I'm going to try my hardest for the next one. I know for a fact that that urge inside of me, wanting to win and research that next vehicle, is what is keeping me going and keeping me playing War Thunder. And I'm pretty sure it's the same for the majority of people, which is why it is an inherent issue, and it is an issue we need to realize, but it is something we cannot change, but it has to be thought about. So whenever you see a discussion about matchmaking and what should be done to try and improve it, just remember, the first point of call you should do when thinking about a matchmaking system is how will someone exploit it? Because that is how the majority of people will win. Somebody will figure out how to exploit the system, which BR works perfectly, which tier works perfectly, which vehicle is the best for researching what other vehicle, and which premium is the best, and then try and work out how they're gaming the system. Because that's what they'll be doing. That's what everybody always does in the matchmaking systems. Just go and ask any League of Legends pro about solo queue. Go and talk to Dota streamers about how many times they see the same picks over and over and over again. Go and talk to Hearthstone players who were around at the time of the last expansion hitting, and ask them about Druid, and ask them about Jade Druid, and then Aggro Druid, and ask them how they feel about it. And they'll all say the same thing: it's absolutely horrible, and it had to be changed. But in War Thunder we do not have that luxury, because no matter how you change it, no matter how screwed up you make the matchmaker system, you cannot change human nature. But you can try and have a go. So yeah, this was basically just a quick video, just outlining a point which I don't think is talked about enough in War Thunder. Something that really needs to be thought about. Something that seems to never be brought up. And maybe it's because it's not to do with game design, maybe it's because it's not something to change. But as I said, just keep it in the back of your mind and use it as a nice marker of how is somebody going to game a system I'm going to create. Because there will be people who do. I'll catch you next time.